Well, over the last few weeks we have been considering and concentrating upon what a virtuous woman looks like, at least as she is described from Proverbs chapter 31. We have seen, I hope, that this passage not only has some very clear things to say, but this passage has very real relevance to every one of us living in our day and age. But that's not what everyone thinks of this woman. For the fact is, our world today, the Proverbs 31 woman, this world mocks the virtuous woman. Hearing such words as, well, after all, she is just a housewife. She doesn't even have a real job. Look at all of her talent. Shame that they're wasted at home. Think where this woman could rise to in the corporate world with all of her abilities. What a waste. And the poor thing, she's trapped at home behind those four walls. Our so-called sophisticated culture regards the Proverbs 31 woman as out of date. She's old-fashioned. She's past her use-by date. I mean, it might have been that women in former generations, we've come of age now. Women have graduated since those days. Women now can have their own identity. They can have their own independence. They can have their own career. They can really make it in the world by themselves. The woman who gives herself for the good of her husband and the benefit of her household is largely no longer appreciated. In today's eyes, she's unimportant. She's useless, we could say, in the modern. She's certainly a misfit. She's a financial burden. She ought to be out there contributing to economic growth. And she's just so irrelevant to our modern world. How tragically wrong they are. Remove all the virtuous women from this society, and this society will crumble. A virtuous woman contributes far more to our country than a successful businesswoman with her $1 million business, even if she may happen to be married to the Prime Minister. How far off the mark our world is their assessment of what true feminine beauty and worth really is. Together, brethren, have we not, from this passage, and we have seen our Lord, I trust, placed before us the ideal woman. Nowhere in the entire Bible is a virtuous woman more clearly explained to us than in this passage. This is the type of woman that Prince Lemuel's him to go look for. This is the type of woman that all Christian women today ought to seek to imitate with the help of God. We have seen this passage, this paragraph here, is not biblical narrative. This is poetry. Spirit that clearly presents God's ideal woman. And where under God one such woman as this is found, she has a praiseworthy life. And that's our focus this morning. The praiseworthy life. We're asking the question, I guess, in a sense, who cares if a woman gives herself to be one like described in Proverbs 31? Well, we know the world doesn't care. Well, who then? Who then will step forward through excellence when so many around us are denigrating her today? Who will speak up and thank God when such a woman as described in this passage is actually found? In a sense, they're the issues we're looking at this morning. are actually obligated before God to praise and affirm the worth of the virtuous woman. Well, our focus this morning will be the last 4 verses of the chapter. And here I believe we find God's where such praise and appreciation will come from. 4 things. These will be our 4 issues that we'll look at. Her children. Secondly, her husband. Thirdly, her community. And then fourthly, her Lord. And yet in the first place is to come from the ones who have benefited the most from her labours. Since they have benefited the most, they are the ones, if you like, who are to be sitting in the front row of the choir, singing her praise. Singing her praise, if you like, the loudest. Well, let's look then at these 4 things that we find in these last 4 verses. Her praiseworthy life from who? Firstly, her children. Now, in many ways, as we've been studying this chapter over the last few weeks, her children have been in the background. Has been the lady herself. But here now, if we come to verse 28, we see that they arise, that they come together in unison, as it were, the offspring of this virtuous woman, and they stand up in the front row of that choir. And I want us to notice that it says they are her children who know her best. Let's read verse 28. Her children, it says, rise up and call her blessed. Her children do something physical and verbal. Do you notice that? Her children call her blessed. Let's see those 2 things. Firstly, notice their physical posture. It says her children rise up. Well, what does this refer to? Well, of course, that's a very big question, and there's lots of answers that people give to it, so we can't be dogmatic as we try and understand this. But this phrase, they rise up, means that they are making a distinct effort to step forward from others in order to say what they have to say. For instance, we can see this similar sort of expression found in other places in the Old Testament. Let's see what we can find as we turn to Jeremiah. We're here in Jeremiah 26, we see a similar expression used. Here as we turn to this passage, Jeremiah the prophet had faithfully declared God's word, and his life is in real jeopardy. So the leaders of the nation, they come to sort out this. Jeremiah was worthy of being put to death. Jeremiah 26 verse 10, it says, when the princes of Judah heard these things, they came up from the king's house to the house of the Lord and sat down in the entry of the new gate of the Lord's house. Now let's read what they do. So the princes and all the people said to the priests and the prophets, this man does not deserve to die, for he has spoken to us in the name of the Lord our God. Then certain of the elders of the land rose up and spoke to all the assembly of the people. Some of the elders here separated themselves from the group. And as we just read in verse 17, they rose up. So that their very physical action indicated they were like saying, we have something very important to say on Jeremiah's behalf. That could be the very idea in Proverbs chapter 31. That the woman's children are willing to step out from the ranks of their peers, and they are unashamedly wanting to make it known. They stand up in the front row. We've got something to say. Or, when we read this phrase in Proverbs 31, that her children rose up, it could simply be the rising up that we see in 1 Kings chapter 2. So please turn there. 1 Kings chapter 2. Then the king is Solomon. In verse 19 we read, please notice as we see this scene described, 1 Kings 2:19. Bathsheba therefore went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah. And the king rose and bowed down to her and sat on his throne and had a throne set for the king's mother, so she sat at his right hand. Now, did you notice the physical posture? Did you notice what happened there in verse 19? The king's on the throne. And his mum comes to him. His mother approaches him, and when his mother comes into the room, his physical actions spoke to all about that room, all the attendants that are standing there and looking on. His physical actions spoke to all of the tremendous in his heart toward his mother. So the attitude of his heart showed itself outwardly in his physical action by rising up. Remember who he was. He was the king. He wasn't above this basic practice of standing up in respect. We can go to other parts of the Bible. We've referred to this in the past of Nehemiah. When the Word of God was read amongst the people stood up. It's part of their respect. So maybe it has the mingling of both these two ideas, and of course they're closely connected, though there is some separate thought there. The children rise up. The children truly appreciate their praiseworthy mother, and hence they unashamedly, as it were, step forward. Something important to say about their mum, perhaps in defence of their mum. They declare by their action of rising up their respect and their honour by the very posture that they are adopting. So we could say that their very body language, their physical posture, relationship. Now, I don't think we should conclude, well, that's just Bible times, it's not relevant for today. Or we shouldn't have the thought, well, that's a former generation, now we have come of age and we don't sort of do that anymore. Now, God makes it very plain that we are commanded to do certain things. There are expectations and there are practices that are godly and righteous practices. And of course, we're directed to honour our father and mother. So can we say by way of to the boys and the girls, to the children, to the young people, to the teenagers, your physical action, your body language, if you like, toward your parents, and especially your mother, is an indication of your respect and your honour to her, your lack of it. For instance, let me get really particular. The sour look on your face when mum tells you something. The rolling of the eyes when mum gives you that direction. Sigh of exasperation when mum suggests that this is the way it could be done. That's all body language that speaks of your disrespect and your dishonour to your mother, or perhaps father. The mother deserves better than that. God expects that you will honour your mother even in your physical posture. How you treat or how you respond to her in your physical posture is important not just to her, important to God. So therefore, on the positive side, you can help her, perhaps up from her seat. You can make sure that you let her passing on in. You can serve her the drink first, or let her have the food first. You can treat her as the queen living in your palace. So as we look in this passage, we see the aspect of physical. But there's also this other aspect in terms of these children. They not only rise up, back in verse 28 it says, her children rise up and call her blessed. They call her blessed, or they bless, translations of that end of that verse fit the structure of the original here. They recognize she is a blessed woman. They know that she has been blessed of God to do what she is and to be what she is. They not only honour her action, but the children also are honouring it by what is coming out of their mouths. They praise, they honour her with their lips. They know that what she is ultimately the fruit of God's grace in her life. And they're glad they have been blessed by her, and therefore they bless her in return. They speak in ways that show their appreciation of her. They thank her for getting up early so that she might get their food ready on that day. They verbally express their gratitude that she stays up late to make, to mend, to wash, to iron, to fold their clothes. Now, of course, as we look at this passage, we shouldn't just think that it only applies. Surely this applies to all of us who have mothers alive. We are all to honour our mothers in ways that are appropriate physically and verbally. Think again about Solomon. He's a grown man. He's no longer, if you like, at school. He's not even under his mother's roof as such. She comes to him. And yet still he honours her. His love, his appreciation, his respect is evident by his physical posture, and you read on kind words towards his mother. So we who have mothers still alive today, we are surely to be cultivating the habit of opening our mouths towards our mothers and telling our mums how much we appreciate them for what they have done for us or what does. She's blessed of God. And she has been such a blessing to us. And you say, but hang on, Pastor, you don't know my mum. No one's saying that your mum was or is sinless. Remember what we said a couple of weeks ago, the Bible book. It's both of those things. We can't get ourselves out of our duty by saying, well, my mum's a sinner, therefore I don't have to honour her. No, there's no obligation there that's connected with that commandment. Honour your father and mother if they're sinless. Of course she's not perfect. Almost every one of us say that our mothers gave up so much for us. In some cases, she turned her back on a wealthy career. In many cases, she turned her back on a life just to care for you. You have been blessed of God to have such a mother. And you are to bless God for her. This is a wonderful, invaluable gift that God has given. That each of us have had a mother who is not still alive. But that doesn't mean you can't bless God for that mother, and the way that you speak about that mother, though she may have already passed on, is to be ways of speech that are honouring. So this applies to all of us. Still alive. We are not to wait till the eulogy at her funeral to express our appreciation. We are not just to do it once a year at Mother's Day if we do that. God expects that we will express our love in clear words and in deliberate actions toward her. We have to have that as something that we are determined to do. So no matter if my siblings are silent, no matter if my peers mock me, by God's grace, I'm going to do. And as one of her children, I will rise up and I will bless her. You say, Pastor, you're going a bit hard this morning on this issue. Does it really matter? Does it really matter if we never get around our appreciation to our mums? Does it really matter? Aren't you making a big case out of a little point? Please turn with me back to the previous chapter in Proverbs, to Proverbs chapter 30. And notice verse 11. Brethren, we live, don't we, in a day and an age and a culture that lacks respect. It's a dying thing, respect. The way people speak to each other, the way they address one another, the way people dress, it's all dying respect. As it shows itself, the respect or lack of respect in the fundamental relationship in the family. Proverbs 30, verse 11. There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. Parallelism. If we hear someone verbally cursing their father, we would have every righteous reason to be outraged. For what we would be hearing would be righteously recognised as wicked. For God says there's something just as bad. There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother, is silent to bless mum. Friends, if we don't honour our parents in these ways, and there's a frightening judgment listed in verse 17. The eyes that mocked his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the and the young eagles will eat it. Does it matter? Well, it seems to me from that passage, God says it matters. The godly conduct of the virtuous, Proverbs 31:28, the children rise up and call her blessed, her praiseworthy life, her children. Now notice secondly, as we move on to the second part of verse 28, there's another source, and that is her husband. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also. And he prays also? Well, clearly implied here, he also rises up and he also praises her. Again, we see there is physical and there is verbal when it comes to the husband. So therefore, we are understanding this to be saying that the husband manifests, firstly, by his physical action. You see, this is the response of the godly man to his virtuous wife. He is anxious to show by his physical actions how much he honours her. Though it could be a long gone. This type of man still opens the door for her when he can. He lets her pass before him on those occasions when he can. When she sits down at the table and it's appropriate and he is able, he pushes the chair in for her. He picks up what she drops so she doesn't have to bend down. He helps her out of the chair as an act of kindness. He walks on the track. He's ever thinking of those physical actions. And all of these physical symbols are designed, as it were, by the godly man to be sending a message to his wife. She's a woman of worth. And by his actions he's saying to her, "I honour you for who you are and what you do." Perhaps it is, friends, that one of the reasons why these things are so rare today is that we as fathers have failed to teach our sons, or worse, demonstrate it and role model it before our sons. And yet, if husbands are going to step forward rising up in order to honour and show appropriate respect to their wives via this physical action, to be received by the wives. One of the wretched effects of the feminist movement is that many women today refuse to accept the help of males. Such resistance ought not to exist between godly men and women. Will delight in her man, treating her like a queen. She will graciously accept such tokens of love, and in doing so, she will rightly feel special. So men, let's in such a way. Now that may mean that some of us need to start doing what we have stopped doing long ago. And yet it means that each of us, from this point, have a fresh opportunity to put these things into practice as to what they mean in your situation unfolds. Verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also rises up, and it says, he praises her. Now there's a different word here. Or call her blessed. He praises her. The word praise here is the Hebrew word halal. It's fascinating. It's one of the 3 or 4 main Hebrew words used for the praise of God. The husband praises her. Good expression. This is actually what the word means. But obviously, it's not saying that the husband worships her. It's obviously not saying that. So that is an error that some men can fall into. This God-fearing woman would not tell her husband. We've seen that she fears God. So what's being expressed here? Well, surely this is legitimate appreciation and gratitude for all that she does for her husband, for all that she does for her husband's children, for all that she does in reaching out her hand for the needy. He sees all those things and he congratulates her, he praises her, he appreciates her, he expresses his gratitude toward her. And what verse 29 provides, effectively, is a quotation of some of the words that the husband actually says in italics. He says, many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Yes, many daughters have done virtuously, he says. Many daughters have acted worthily, but you take the cake. You're the best. Now, is this a biased husband speaking? Yes. Is there anything wrong with that? No. This is what is expected. This is the godly conduct between a godly man and his wife. This is to who he says this to. Verse 29, many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. He says this to her. This is not just what he says to others, and that might be legitimate as well. This is not just what he says in the secret place and she doesn't. He unashamedly tells her these words to her face. My dear, there are lots of good women, but God has blessed me so much to give you to me. You, as far as I am concerned, are... Now for this virtuous woman, this wife as she is in this case, there's a sense in which she doesn't care what the world thinks of her. She doesn't really care what her neighbours say about her. But she desperately longs to know that her husband really does. There is perhaps nothing more that she delights to hear than the words of appreciation from her own hubby. Is that right, ladies? This is the man that praise of my life, and he actually appreciates my efforts. Not just occasionally brings me flowers, but he actually tells me and he expresses verbally his praise. When was the last time you did that, men? How long has it been since you praised your wife to her face? Most men are not very good at saying these sorts of things. Or maybe we can't hide behind that. Many might be able to say, well, I haven't had very good role models to know how to do this. We can't hide behind that either. We've just got to spit the words out. They're in. And spit the words out. And express that appreciation that our wives desperately need to hear. The world criticizes and despises the sacrifices that many of our wives make. What sort of man knowing that and stands by with his lips closed? What sort of man is that? A weak, inconsiderate, unloving male. So much for us. Is it not a small thing for the Lord to ask that we as men who are husbands here would rise up and praise our wives? And here you thought Proverbs 31 was... It's much about men as it is about women. You see, in a sense, we find the virtuous man in this passage, as well as the virtuous woman. There's a third area that the passage unfolds in terms of the context out of which her praise will come. Notice with me verse 31. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Give her back what she has laboured for. Give back to her what she has earned, what is justly due to her. Let some of it come of appreciation. In the first part of this verse, it's like we have the general duty. Give her of the fruit of her hands. And in the second part of the verse, it's like there's more specific direction here. Let her own works praise her in the gates. Now, according to verse, they were a public place. They were an important place within that culture and in that time. They were a place where the representatives of the people gather. Look at verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. In the gates, where the people are assembled, where the people gather to hear judgments. A prominent place that was in that community. He's saying, let it be known among the people of the community her real worth. She is object of the community. If we think again of Ruth, that we've referred to a couple of times, though she was single, remember, she is described as a virtuous woman. In Ruth chapter 3 and verse 11, Boaz says, and he says about Ruth, all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. It's not just that Naomi knows at home. All the people of my town know Ruth are a virtuous woman. So the virtuous woman, whether she's either single or married, obviously acts in ways that the surrounding community can't but help to notice what she is like. The way she prioritises her care for others if she's married is primarily towards her husband of all the household and her concern for the needy even within the community. They see her selflessness. The community is to publicly acknowledge and acclaim her for what she has done and does do. There's a sense when we read that verse, there's a fair testimony, and her very own works bring honour to her. Her own works, it says, praise her. All those who have been blessed by her should step forward, should stand up, should step forward, and should express their praise and their appreciation. This is a great example of a woman in the context of a community that was known. In Acts chapter 9 we have that other example we've referred to in passing. Maybe, Lord willing, we'll come back to this even next week. In Acts chapter 9 we have Dorcas. She's a virtuous woman. She's not called that, but she is a virtuous woman. She's single. Her works praise her. The fruit of her hands praise her. Even when she's dead and gone, those fruit, the hands that had done those things, the fruit that came from those hands get presented back, and all of her friends come, look what she did for us. Look, she made this for me. Look, she made that for me. As we think about this, how does this apply for our day? Well, we know that very few in our community appreciate the virtuous woman. We've already made that point. So I want to submit to you that the first, not the only, but the first and the most fundamental area where this aspect ought to be the community of God's people. God's gathered people, when and where God's people gather together. That's where there should be praise given to the virtuous woman or women. For surely it's here where these virtues are known clearest, dearest. It's we who gather as God's people, who observe such godly qualities in our ladies. It's in this setting, each Lord's Day, where we ought to very naturally express our appropriate appreciation to our ladies. Let her works praise her in the context of authorities, and her commitments are valued and appreciated. In the context of the community of God's people, the virtuous woman is to be affirmed. She is to be appreciated in ways that are suitable in expressing her great worth for what she is and what she does. The world might despise you for what you do. I'm speaking on behalf of the men. But we love you. And we appreciate you for what you are and what you do. Men, young people, children, the very manner our ladies are treated here should be so different to their treatment in the world. Cherished, honoured and appreciated for all that they do in their high calling. Now obviously, let me just underscore this, we're not talking about the praise of men. In the end of the day, we are simply recognising God's grace in their lives for what they are as women is because of what God has. God, they have sought to be faithful to the Lord, and by God's grace, I believe our ladies are. And yet, we are to encourage. We are to honour our women who have put their fingers in their ears to the world's call for them to get out of the home and to get in the career. As a church, we are to labour more and more to have a climate in which our ladies who give themselves to being virtuous, whether they're married or single, that they will all feel like queens and princesses when they step into the community. Her children, her husband, her community, fourthly and finally, her Lord. Verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. This promise, did you see there's a promise here? Fear the Lord, she shall be praised. This promise no doubt refers to receiving praise from family and friends, those things that we watch on something bigger. I've sought to underscore in this brief series of sermons, this woman fears God. She lives her life under the eye of God. Coram ventral in her life. That's a Latin phrase. Coram Deo simply means before the face of God. The virtuous woman's primary concern not her only concern. But her primary concern is the smile of God. Her primary dread is the frown of God. The virtuous woman is to know that her praiseworthy life is noticed by her Lord. I want you to turn with me to a passage in the New Testament, to the last passage today, to Colossians chapter 3. We come into those verses that speak about slave servants. We know, don't we, that the servants and slaves in the Roman world were largely undervalued people. They were abused people. They were greatly neglected. And Paul has a word for those slaves who had become called upon as slaves to simply do just the menial tasks in life. He says in verse 22, Colossians 3, bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing. We should not think that the fearing God thing is just an Old Testament thing. No, here it is, in the New Testament, coming from the pen that Paul is writing. Slaves, he says, carry out your task, coram deo, before the face of God. Your primary God's smile. Your primary dread being God's frown. No, it's not your earthly master's frown. It's not your earthly master's smile that's your primary concern. Your primary concern is your heavenly master's smile and frown. He then says in verse 23, and whatever you do as to the Lord and not to men. As you engage in those menial tasks, he says, think about your Lord when you work. Do it for the Lord. You have a reward coming, verse 24, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you Christ. Slaves couldn't always count on their earthly masters appreciating them or noticing what they did. And ladies, I'm not saying that you're slaves. When your husband fails to appreciate you, and he has, and he does, and he will, it's wrong, but we're sinners. When your husband fails, and when your children take you for granted, when your church shows no appreciation for all that you do, here is your ultimate motivation. God sees what you do. God recognizes what you do. It's God's praise that should keep you going. God's praising us because Romans 2 uses that expression to speak about men. Human praise, though, as nice as it is to hear that, can sometimes be very hollow and hypocritical. But God's is never that. Salvation must be the chief concern for you, ladies. Whether you're married or whether you're single. There's a sense in which, I think, it was a lot easier in a former generation for a woman to be dedicated. God knows your sacrifices today in this context. We want to encourage you, ladies. Keep going. Continue to be faithful to your God all your days. Keep working and heading for the day when you can be your heavenly master and he'll say to you, well done, good and faithful servant. When we have that perspective, it matters not what the world says. When a husband doesn't say what he should say, and the children don't say what they should say, and the church doesn't say what it should say, that matters. But within the perspective of what matters more, God's smile is the thing that matters the most. Without the grace of God, not one of you ladies will ever be a virtuous woman. Without the grace of God, not one of you will remain faithful to the very end. Many start well and finish lousy. You need the grace of God to continue. People of God, if we are to be what God calls us to be that married or single, women, men, teenagers, boys or girls, husbands or wives, we all desperately need God's grace. So we think if we see the ideal woman, it can be achieved, but only by the grace of God. May it please our gracious Lord to encourage you, ladies, through these sermons, to aspire with the Spirit's aid to be that woman, to raise up a new generation of virtuous women, even in our own midst. May it please Him to give our sons the desire to go looking for a Proverbs 31 woman. And may it please God to help us all we can to cultivate the climate in our relationship with our wives and our family, with our daughters and our sons, that what we have seen in this passage would be a mirror reflection of your home and my home. Grant these things according to His own good pleasure.